All right, we're back for part number 3. This is chapter number 5 for CSIS 2200, Managing an Information System. We left off with these different threats, and it's good to be aware of these terms and what each of them they do. So you've heard the term virus and maybe worms. Viruses and worms, they're similar, but they're basically a malicious type of code that you can spread by usually in software transfer. And you can track viruses predominantly right nowadays. There's a lot of viruses in those torrent sites. So if you go to a torrent site and you're downloading pirated games or any kind of executable file, you more than likely are infecting your computer with some kind of virus. Now, a worm is slightly different, similar that it does malicious work to your computer, but a worm has an additional capability of making duplicate copies of itself and spreading like a worm. And so it does. Viruses are passed on with programs and in contact with other software. Worms then can look, and they're a little more sophisticated. They look for places to reside, and they copy themselves, and they spread. Now, a Trojan horse or a Trojan programs, these are programs that you'll download some kind of a program thinking that it does one thing, but in fact, in the background, there's something else going on. Like the old story of the Trojan horse. They brought the Trojan horse into the city, and then once it was in the city, the soldiers came out and attacked. And it's similar to the Trojan type of a threat, is that once you install it on your computer, you've infected your computer and you can lock it down. So an example of that would be things like the ransomware. A ransomware where you've installed something on your computer, and then the Trojan horse comes out and says, "Ha, I've installed on your computer. I've locked down your different systems, disabled your access. Now pay me money or I'm not going to release your computer." A logic bomb is something that happens based on a condition, hence the name logic. So I did one of these years and years and years ago. I actually created a logic bomb. What happened was I was working for a company, and I was I did about 3 weeks worth of work for the company, and I had sent an invoice and they didn't pay the invoice, and I was a little worried. So what I did was I installed a tool in their computer that on a certain date, if the tool wasn't removed, it would actually wipe all their computers clean. So the company I ended up working for the company for over a month, and they never paid my invoice. And so as a result, and I mean, this is not ethical. I'm not advocating this. It was something I did that was wrong. But what happened was I kept asking the company to pay their bill, and they just said they would, but they never would. They didn't do it. After 2 months, they wouldn't pay their bill. This logic bomb went off, and basically what it did is it just wiped all their computers clean, stripped everything out. So after it stripped everything clean, I said, they called me up and said, "Hey, there's something wrong with the computers." And I said, "Oh, well, you haven't paid my bill." And they said, "Okay, well, we'll pay your bill. I'll come in and fix the computers." And I said, "Well, pay my bill first, and then I'll come in and fix your computers." So that's what ended up happening. They did pay my invoice, and I actually asked for the money up front because I was worried they weren't going to pay my second invoice. So I know it sounds a little unethical, and it is, and I shouldn't have probably done that. But I felt like, as a young person starting out in the industry, I thought, so kind of a confession there. Backdoor is sometimes what happens is people will create an additional authentication, which they refer to as a backdoor, so that at any time somebody can just simply log onto the system with a kind of a back authentication. This was popularized in the movie called War Games. That was that video link I showed you on YouTube. So you can check that out, and that'll explain what a backdoor threat is. All right, the blended threat. Now, I've never really heard of this term like this, but what they're talking about is that some of these, there's multiple components to them. So they can incorporate a virus and a worm, or a Trojan and a virus, or a Trojan and a logic bomb would be something like a blended threat. So it's basically where you're taking possibly two different types of threats and combining them together. rootkits are malicious kind of malware that grants access usually to the root directory of a computer. So rather than having access to a particular area, it gives you access to the front doors and to the entire root folder, the root directory, the beginning directory of the company. Denial of service attack, I think I mentioned this before, DOS, it's when a computer virus has infiltrated a server and it coordinates a particular time and attack on a particular website. And it uses the resources of the server, the drone server, the zombie server, I call it, to attack another server. And there's been several denial of service attacks and have brought down companies like Yahoo, and there's been a lot of other companies that were brought down for a certain period of time. And when that happens, it has an impact on their stock prices. So, for example, somebody could have a denial of service attack on, let's say, Tesla, and they could bring Tesla's servers down and disrupt their company for a day. And what they might do is they might short the stock because they've coordinated an attack. They short the stock will drop because it's been attacked. A lot of people will sell their shares thinking, well, their company has been compromised. Social engineering is probably one of the more common ones that are starting to gain favor now because it's so powerful. Social engineering means that they're going to go into a company and actually make a contact or have a relationship with that company. So what happens is some hacker will come into a company either through the phone or through the front door. They'll pretend that there's someone they're not. They'll become somewhat trusted with their security or the IT people, and while they're not aware, they will actually go in and they'll plant some kind of a tool on their system or gain some unauthorized access. Another way of doing this is they just phone them up and they say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I've lost my password, and they ask for permission to gain access. It's probably the easiest way. They just sound really confident. They call the company and they gain access. This happened recently to Donald Trump in his Twitter account. So his Twitter account was hacked. Somebody was able to breach his security. Now, how they did it, they probably didn't call up, say, hi, I'm Donald Trump, but they must have done it in some other way. But it was a social engineering hack that they did to gain access. And if you think about how dangerous that could possibly be with someone like Donald Trump, where, if someone gained access to his Twitter account, he says he's going to, release nuclear bombs on a particular country, it would cause chaos and panic. So could have drastic impacts. So quite an interesting hack that they've come up with is a social engineering threat, and it is a threat. So what you should be aware of is when someone's asking for your information, always verify. I get, so from time to time, people will call me up and say, I just want to confirm, this is the bank calling and confirm information. And I treat everybody as a criminal when they ask me my information. I want them to verify who they are first. So I ask them, okay, well, who are you? Why are you calling? Can you verify who you are? Can you give me personal information about me to make sure that I know who you are, that it would have that information? And I will not give out any information unless I verify them. And I've actually done this to the point where I didn't trust them, and it backfired. My credit card company called me up and said, we recognize there's been an inappropriate charge on your account. Was this you? And at the time, I didn't realize it was me. It was a charge that was automatically deducted from my credit card. And I said, no, that's not me. Cancel my card. And I thought it was a phishing, a social engineering attack. And sure enough, it was the actual credit card company. So they did cancel my card and send me a new card, but it kind of backfired on me, but for being a little overcautious. I think it's better to be overcautious than not. Like I said, viruses, they're self-propagating programs that can be triggered by a specific time or an event, similar to the denial of service. So the denial of service and viruses, that's that blended type of threat that can happen. And I put up a link here. I'll let you guys go through that and read up more on viruses and virus attacks. I think I've talked enough about it. Worms, again, same idea. Very similar to a virus, but they can spread themselves without having any other interaction. So worms can be actually extremely dangerous because they will seek out other servers and they can gain access. They will infect other systems on their behalf. So they replicate themselves. Code Red was actually a denial of service attack. These are some names. If you want, you can Google these names. Code Red worm or the Melissa worm. These are some big ones that were out there and what they actually did. Probably a good idea to go in and do that. Trojan programs, Trojan horses, they call these threats. They usually are hidden with inside of programs. You get these, like I said, from those torrent sites when you run an executable file. This is probably the most dangerous thing you can possibly do is download an exe file and install it on your computer. You're probably definitely going to get infected. A lot of people do that. Logic bombs, I think I've told you my story about the logic bomb. It's triggered at a specific time or event. I did this when clients wouldn't pay their bills. And backdoor, I think I've explained that. Blended threat, denial of service attack. So these are all what I've already explained. In the botnet is an automated program like a robot or a bot that goes out and it uses, it digs through and looks for access on its own. And in this particular example that the book's talking about is that it looks for networks of computers and the Internet of Things devices. Now this is IoT is something that you're going to see a lot of. IoT as the Internet of Things means things are small things that are all connected to the Internet. So what's happening now is there's a whole group of consumable devices like temperature devices or your Google Assist or your Alexa or those types of things that are connected to the internet. They're internet and there are things all over the house that are being connected, making smart homes. And these botnets are the way that they hack them. So keeping your firmware up on these is always a good idea because the firmwares will always eliminate a lot of these bots that are out there. There's a telephone denial of service attacks, which basically attacks the telephone networks rather than computers, and creates high volume calls and can tie up the lines and bring down telephone lines, for example. As I've said, the social engineering, it's where using people skills. People are usually calling them up and they're asking them to reveal, personal information about the individual. These are probably the more common types of attacks that are getting results now. There's a good link here on an article of a social engineering attack that happened, I believe, in Edmonton. You guys can have a look at that. Dumpster diving, this is another way that they do this. Physically, they go out and they start looking through your trash to see if they can find documentation and information. And they get pieces of information, they correlate that, and they can sometimes gain access to company information. Shoulder surfing is just that. That's where someone's looking over your shoulder. Maybe they check out what your password is. So again, you just being more aware. Or tailgating, that's another term of following people too closely and looking at what they're doing. Scareware, another term. I haven't actually seen one of these, but basically just scaring you into some kind of it's probably more of a, it's not really that dangerous. They just want to scare you rather than hurt your computer, just showing that they've infiltrated your computer. Pretexting is sort of where you're pretending to act as somebody else, as the pretext of somebody else to gain access, saying that you're you're a manager at another office and you're in town, but you need access to the computers. Can they help you log in? Something like that. What are some of the measures that we can do to help combat this? Well, like on your phones now, we have biometrics. We use our fingerprints, facial recognition. We have security codes, PIN IDs, that sort of thing. We have authentication, a username and password to log in. We can use private networks to prevent sniffing attacks. We can do data encryption so that the data cannot be interpreted if it's intercepted or sniffed. We can use a secured socket layer on all of our transactions that we do online. And a computer emergency response team, which is the CERT, which is another group that can also help in formulating a strategic plan to help your organization build better network security. And there's a link for that as well. All right, so they go into a little more detail about the biometrics, facial recognition, fingerprints, iris analysis, signature analysis, voice recognition. These are all great tools for helping, and also helps as a user to access information quicker. You can simply just put your fingerprint and you're authenticated, which is really nice. Non-biometric measures, we can put in a physical firewall. This is a computer that basically stands guard and has programs to look for intrusion. Intrusion detection system. This is something that we even have at Douglas College, and it means that if you have a laptop and you have a network cable and plug it into one of our network ports, the network detection system will recognize that your computer is not a college computer, and it will shut that port down and lock you out. So someone who's trying to hack Douglas College, maybe a student comes in and they want to hack, they can bring their laptop with their shark wire and they want to do a little bit of sniffing. They can plug directly into a RJ45 port and they can try to access the network, but the network intrusion detection system at Douglas College would identify them, locate the port, and then it would alert the security, and they would actually locate where the port is located, and they could even send security guards to that port, to that room, to detect who is trying to access a port. And they might come upstairs and say, okay, who's connected to this port? Why are you connected to this port? And what's going on there? So that's a physical layer. These are both physical. They're biometric measures that you can do. Callbacks. This was an old system that they used to use when we used to use telephones back in the day before we had fiber optics and other 4G and 5G technologies. We used to use telephones and dial-up. And how it would work is, because back then they could even spoof phone numbers, you could get the computer to call you back. So it would disconnect, it would call back on the same number that you're calling, therefore verifying the number that was being called from. And maybe there's only certain numbers that were able to access the system by using their telephone number. Again, firewalls is a hardware primarily, but there are software firewalls as well that you can install on computers to help mitigate and protect against hacking. And I got a link here on YouTube on talking a bit more about firewalls. Now, I will mention that you guys have an assignment to do, which is your LinkedIn Learning course this week on Security Plus. And that course is going to go over in more detail a lot of these types of topics that we've been talking about in this video series here. But basically what a firewall does in sort of a bigger picture is it looks at all data that comes in and out of the network. So if you have a company over here, this is your private network company, you have a firewall that's on the data connection to the internet. So anything that comes into your company has to be looked at by the firewall. So the firewall looks at the data to see if it's any malicious intent, and then it'll then pass it on to the network. Similarly with the network, if someone's within your organization and it's outgoing, the firewall's still going to look at it before it sends it onto the internet. So firewalls log and track everything that's also going on. So when students are using the internet, all of their information is being recorded and logged. So it records you according to your student number, and it records things like the date, the websites, the time, the computer, the room, that kind of thing. So you can do an audit trail to get back. Now, another term you might hear is a proxy server, which is very similar to a firewall. A proxy is something acting on your behalf. So, for example, if you've got this network, and within your network you've got your Microsoft Office server, you've got your database server, you've got files on your computer, you've got the web server. It's all connected to your local area network, and you have PCs connected all over your company as well. So your entire organization has some kind of a topology that's set up here that has to go out onto the internet. So every time somebody and something here gets on the internet, it goes through what they call a proxy server or a firewall server. So it's acting on your behalf. So as a PC, when you're going to the internet, this proxy server acts on your behalf, because the point of exit is an address that the internet can then send back, and then that address coming back in says, oh, that was for PC number 1, so it's redirected back here. And if PC number 2 here sends out, there's a log that tracks that when it goes out, it says, oh, I'm coming back to talk to PC number 2, and it sends the data back here. So it's acting on behalf of these different PCs or servers within an organization. They call it a proxy server or a firewall proxy server. And I think I've talked about this intrusion detection system. It's protecting against anybody plugging their system into the network, either internally or externally. And the firewall actually has software that checks it. So every time a computer is turned on, that computer is then sent information to the firewall to say, hey, I'm turning on. I want to access the internet or access the server. And it'll check its list to say, is that computer number connected to that port valid? If it's not, it sets up an intrusion detection and it alerts the authorities. Now we can do some tracing here. I just wanted to show you a little tool here to show you how that this could be done in the background. All right, there's a lot of tools on the internet to help detect or track, and this could be used by network administrators, and it can also be used by hackers. So a lot of times these tools are turned off or disabled within an organization because they don't want outside sources to be able to do this. But if you guys want, you can go to a website here called tracemyip.org. And basically what it does is it traces where your IP address is. And what's really interesting about this is that it gives a lot of personal information about an individual. So when you connect to a server, you can actually find out where that server physically is. And there's more tools to actually map it out and show you precisely where you're located. As it's kind of showing up here, with certain software tools, it can geo-track exactly where you're located, which is kind of scary because people, if you're communicating with them, once they find out your IP address, they can find out roughly where you're located. That's one of these hacking tools that's used. And we can help detect intrusions with IP tracking. All right, there's also physical security measures, so control access to computers and networks physically and put them in a safe location. That's always first step. They have cables, and these cables can be unplugged physically, so you may want to protect those and shield them. And you can lock things down, of course. And they have all sorts of different other types of technologies that you might get when you are working. And when you get a job, normally what they will do is give you an ID badge, and that ID badge will track where you can go, and it'll track where you've been and when and where you've been. So it'll open and access doors in different locations. There is a whole course just on access control. This is a method by which administrators will grant data access to individuals who should have it. And these are usually protected with authentication. So you'll need, of course, a password to access that information. And you'll be given rights based on your job to certain types of data. Now, I've talked a bit about, password and, password, combination of password characters and symbols in a way that we can build our own little algorithm key to help make a secure password. I really highly encourage you guys to do that so that you can build a proper authentication to any system and have it secure. All right, that brings us up to virtual private networks, and I'll save that for the next video.